Daniel chapter 5 verses 29 to 31. Then commanded Belteshazzar, and they clothed Daniel with scarlet, and put a chain of gold about his neck, and made a proclamation concerning him, that he shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. In that night was Belteshazzar the king of the Chaldeans slain, and Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. Then commanded Belteshazzar. Even after the bad news was given to him, he still kept his word of promoting the person that could read the writing and give the interpretation. Daniel was not wishing any reward for the service given. Verse 17, thus the king was doing this against Daniel's desire. Belteshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, slain. The judgment that was pronounced upon Babylon was carried out the same night, with Belteshazzar being slain. Darius the Median took the kingdom. Darius the Mede took the throne of the kingdom at the age of 62. Darius came to his nephew Cyrus the Persian and asked for his allegiance in laying siege to Babylon. He accepted and thus went out to take over the city. Seeing the immense size of Babylon, he knew there was no way to bring the walls down or scale them with any success. Learning of the feast that was to take place, Cyrus decided to divert the river Euphrates and march his army in when the water level was low enough. With this accomplished, his army marched in. And if it were not for two gates that had been left ajar, they would have had to march out the other side, as there were walls and gates down both sides of the river. On gaining access to the inside of the city, they quickly subdued it and put the king to death, thus ending the short reign of Babylon over the then known world. Cyrus gave the rulership to his uncle Darius out of respect for his seniority, but Darius only ruled for 2 years, then died at the age of 64. The way in which the city was to be taken and the person that was to take it had been prophesied of by Isaiah approximately 150 years prior. Isaiah 44 verse 27, Isaiah 45 verse 3. Truly, God is in control. But this directly parallels to the end of time, with the overthrow of spiritual Babylon when Jesus comes the second time. As described in Revelation chapter 16 verse 12. In this verse, we see the drying up of the river Euphrates so as to prepare the way for the kings of the east. See insert A. Just as literal Babylon's life support was the Euphrates, and the drying up of it would sound a certain death, so too it is with spiritual Babylon when its support. Water in prophecy is a symbol of multitude, peoples, etc. Revelation chapter 17 verse 15. From the people and king of the earth is dried up. It sounds an imminent death for her, and in doing so it prepares the ways for Christ to come, who comes from the east as King of kings and Lord of lords. Matthew 24 verse 27, Ezekiel 43 verse 2, and Revelation chapter 19 verse 16. Just as Cyrus came from the east, so too does Christ come from the east. As Cyrus dried up the Euphrates, Babylon's life support, and thus conquering it and setting the Jews, who were God's people, free from their captivity and back to Jerusalem. So too does Christ dry up spiritual Babylon's life support, which is the multitudes of people and the kings of the earth that gives her its power, thus preparing for Christ to conquer it when it comes and set spiritual Israel, who are God's people, free from their captivity and back to the new Jerusalem. Insert note A. Approximately 150 years before the overthrow of the Babylonian Empire, it was prophesied by God through Isaiah that Cyrus was going to do it and how he was going to do it. Told in Isaiah 44 verse 27, Isaiah 45 verse 5, that the deep, which is a reference to the river Euphrates, would be dried up. Jeremiah even stated that a drought will be upon her waters. Jeremiah chapter 50 verse 38. And that the two lives gates will be left open so as to gain access into the city via this. God named Cyrus as the man who would overthrow Babylon. His mother, Mandane, was a maid, and his father, Cambyses, a Persian, which shows the connection for Cyrus having an uncle that is a Mede. The Persians were in subjection to the Medes for many decades until Cyrus led the revolt and reversed this position. Jeremiah chapter 51 verse 46 shows that there was to be a rumor one year that Cyrus was coming to visit Babylon. This was so until Cyrus and his army came to the river Gindes, one of the tributaries of the Tigris River, and one of his spirited, sacred white horses decided to swim across. The horse, drawn as it was pulled under by a rapid current. So Cyrus, to appease his fury, divided his army up and told them to dig 180 trenches each side of the river, thus attempting to make the river's flow weak. With this episode passed, his attention was turned towards Babylon. That 1 year later he came just as was prophesied in Jeremiah. In the taking of Babylon, Cyrus diverted the river Euphrates, thus somewhat drying it up, so his men could march up the river and hopefully into the city. Because the river ran through the center of the city, there were high walls with a large number of gates for access down its side. If it were not for the hand of God in having the Babylonians forgetting to close one of the gates of brass, Cyrus and his men would have not been able to enter the city. Thus the city was captured exactly how Isaiah had prophesied. General historical information can be found in the Histories by Herodotus, page 49 through 60 and 83. See tables below for more parallels showing that Cyrus is a type of Christ and parallels between literal Babylon and spiritual Babylon.